So I'm Jo. I'm older than I'd like to be, but nonetheless. I guess my background before I became a mum, I was a teacher for a long time. I taught English and history and dance and drama. And then I got involved in politics in local government. Originally I was elected to local council. Okay, I'm reformed. And then went on to work in state government. So I was a policy advisor to the Minister for Education, and then I went to become policy advisor in police. So, and then I became mayor of the city that I was elected as a councillor to. So I stopped being a state government policy advisor for a while. After I finished being mayor, I went back to being a state government policy advisor, then in transport. It sounds like I'm really flighty, but I was actually working for the same person the whole way through. And then I left that job and became the general manager of strategic communications and government advertising in the New South Wales government. So fairly big public policy sort of background, but not from a policy purist perspective, from a political perspective, and I guess reasonably aware of where government spends big amounts of money and where government is interested in getting a sort of bang for buck, I guess. And having had my kids, more and more acutely aware of the burgeoning costs of healthcare, particularly in paediatrics, because it's a difficult area to establish research, particularly for medications and for surgery, and yet those medications are being used and surgery is being used because they have to be. And more and more acutely aware, I guess, of the severity of some of the chronic illnesses that kids are dealing with. So in my spare time, other than managing my kids, and this it's kind of not professional, but it's a volunteer capacity. I'm also the national president of the Reflux Infant Support Association, so I have some visibility of how kids are interacting with the health system that have gut conditions across Australia and some internationally as well, because in my president's role I'm also in contact with similar organisations in other countries. And I'm also on the consultative committee for Sydney Children's Hospital at Randwick for the emergency department. So Elizabeth is my youngest daughter, and she had a fair few gastric issues and bowel issues that were quite acute. So we had spent a fair amount of time in and out of hospital with her and dealing with her medical issues, which is my prelude to say this is my excuse for not having noticed how developmentally behind she was when she started preschool. When she started preschool teachers were saying, we think she's deaf, she can't hear us, we can be standing behind her or beside her, and if we are yelling her name, she can't hear us or process that sound. So they were concerned. We went and did hearing tests, her hearing was fine. She had problems with speech. She was assessed by a speech pathologist as being very behind in expressive language. So at 2 years she was about 9 months behind, I think 9 to 12 months maybe. But for expressive language she was 12 to 15 months behind, which meant that as a 2-year-old, probably 2 years and 3 to 4 months, she was speaking in single words, occasionally 2 words together. But more than that, if you asked her to pick up a ball and take it to daddy, she would look at you for a long time, sort of understand she was being asked to do something, but end up picking up a chair and taking it to her sister. She just didn't understand what she was being asked to do a lot of the time. She spent a lot of time in her own head and in her own little world, playing with her own toys, not interacting with people, so she didn't have a lot of eye contact and she didn't engage. So we ended up in Danielle's office in a slightly circuitous route. I kind of felt like I got pushed there a few different ways. I'd seen Danielle speak probably a year before at the Mind Conference and hadn't drawn the dots that might be useful to me. I have a very good friend whose 2 children were patients of Danielle, and she sort of slapped me upside the head and said I needed to go and and see Danielle. And also we're under the care of a biomedical doctor who had done incredible things for my children's gastro systems, and she also said that it would be a really good idea if we went to see Danielle. Before doing that though, we were already under the care of a speech pathologist for feeding because she has significant issues feeding, and we were seeing an occupational therapist who had also done an initial report at the request of the preschool and me to make a determination about how behind she was in a whole range of other things. So she was also developmentally delayed from a gross motor and fine motor skills perspective. But the thing, I guess, that was affecting us the most was she wasn't able to really talk or communicate. She was sleeping incredibly poorly, and so we weren't getting a lot of sleep. So they were probably the two big things, and the feeding thing is also doing our heads in, but is improving. So we ended up in Danielle's office. Danielle did an initial assessment that involved, you know, the things that she does, her balance, and trying to work out how and if her limbic system was working and how it was off, and gave us a few exercises to do. Sort of explained a little bit about, I guess, rudimentary brain anatomy and stuff that might not be working properly, and the kinds of exercises we could do to help. So Danielle sent us away with a few exercises to do, and I thought, oh, okay, well, give it a go in the same way that you do with anything else, you know, OT, speech. So my expectations compared to, I guess, what the outcomes were fairly low. You know, you do OT, you see, you know, improvements over time, but they're gradual, and sometimes they're not necessarily the improvements you were aiming for. You get a little bit of tangential help here and there, but we saw these massive leaps within visits, like within 1 and 2 visits. So within 1 and 2 visits, we were getting more eye contact. We were getting a desire to communicate with us. We were getting a couple of words being put together, 2 and 3 words. And there were even these moments where I remember 2 exercises that Danielle gave us very early on. One was the tantrum hack, which is just awesome. Every parent should know it, irrespective of whether you've got developmental delays. But we could pick her up by her right side, or pull even on the limbs on her right side, and she would just stop having these flailing, hideous tantrums pretty much instantly and go on with doing the next thing. It was just like incredible. So that was really helpful even at bedtime, getting her into bed. You could just sort of pull onto her left arm and leg and she'd stop having a screaming fit, and you might be able to get somewhere closer towards getting her into bed. But more than that, Danielle gave us this other exercise, which, as in my very basic understanding, was basically to make her right and left brain talk to each other a bit better. And we would get, I think it was her left arm, and do figure eights with it, and her left leg and do a figure eight with it. And she would literally go from being able to say 1 word or 2 to, like, within the next second, come out with a sentence, come out with 4 and 5 words. And within it would have been the equivalent of 3 and 4 visits, 5 at the most. She was doing these 12-word sentences, or they might be like 2 or 3-word sentences or 4-word sentences all put together. But everybody noticed. It was it was not just the preschool teachers that were like, "Who is this child?" But OT was like, "I cannot believe the language coming out of this kid." I had so my nephews, her cousin, who would say, you know, they don't kind of have a self-edit function, so they don't know to kind of be nice about these things. Oh my God, she can talk! Like, I didn't think she could talk. She can talk. All of a sudden she could talk. It was like a light got switched on. And it wasn't just that she could put words together, she could then look at you and talk to you and ask for something, and things sort of started to fall into place. She started to sleep better. I mean, it wasn't just magic, you know, there were exercises that Danielle gave us to do that we had to do, but I wouldn't have understood that kind of exercise could change the way that her brain worked the way that it did. She was better able to regulate everything. She's better able to regulate her emotions, better able to regulate her sleep. So suddenly she was sleeping for, like I say suddenly, it's over a period of a couple of months. But in the scheme of things and with these kinds of children, that's suddenly, right? She would sleep for longer periods, and then she would start sleeping through the night. And we have been able to, so since seeing Danielle, she had one more bowel incident that saw us go to emergency and saw us have to muck around with her, the medication she was on for her gut. But it was actually a very interesting thing to occur at the time that it did, because it made us sort of see that perhaps now she didn't need the medication that she was on as much, that she was actually better able to regulate her digestive system, and we have slowly been able to wean her off the medication. They're not medications you can just drop because they force, acid they regulate the acid production for the stomach, so you just got to be careful the way that you ratchet off them. But we've been able to come off them, and in the last week, so I think we've been seeing Danielle for 8 months, maybe 8 months.
16 visits in that
16
time.
visits. In 16 visits, she's now off all of her PPI medication, and last night, because you expect a hiccup when you drop down a medication dose, so we've gone down the last 10 milligrams in the last week. Last night she slept from 7:30 till 6:45 this morning, and that is nothing short of a miracle, really, nothing short of a miracle. And considering that my older daughter, who had a very similar condition, has never been able to do that, and certainly we weren't able to drop her off medications until much, much later. But a straight up sort of biomedical approach did help her more than it helped Elizabeth, because Elizabeth really needed this piece to be able to reconnect the pieces in her brain that weren't connected for whatever reason. I think there were reasons, and Danielle will probably be able to speak better to what they might have been. But all of a sudden we have, I say all of a sudden, but in the period of, Danielle says 16 visits, I would say 6 to 8 months, we have a fully functioning, completely developmentally normal, now 3-year-old. So she is completely caught up with language. She is eating in volumes that you would hope a child like her age would, not the kinds of food, but we're working on that. But she's put on some weight, and she is sleeping through the night, and that puts her in a position to be able to probably, start school with her developmental cohort that probably she would not have had she continued on the trajectory she was on. I think she was kind of the kid that would have needed a lot of allied health support, a lot of financial support from medical plans, and the kinds of things that you need to do. So a pretty incredible turnaround so this is now a kid that really, in terms of the amount of money we have to spend on her medical expenses, are pretty much negligible. When she was costing thousands just to be able to manage her. That's our journey. So we had begun seeing a speech therapist through the occupational therapists, and the speech therapy itself wasn't doing a lot, but within 6 visits the speech therapist said, I don't think we need to see you anymore. I think she's now in the neurotypical range at the lower end, but keep doing whatever it is that you're doing, because I think she'll catch up. And we then saw a developmental paediatrician who asked that at 3 years she be reassessed for her language to see where she ended up, and we're about to do that, and every medical professional associated with her, there are quite a few, are all of the view that she's now at the higher end of that normal range. So what I would say is, I've done, because I also have an older daughter who she was tube fed for 2 years, so we've done speech/feeding therapy with her for 6.5 years, and in that time I have seen speech therapists and physiotherapists, occupational therapists, paediatricians, dietitians, everyone, with both kids. So what I would say is most of the time you're in a session with a medical professional, and between you are workshopping what's been working and what hasn't been working, and what else you might try based on the theories that we have, you know, their working theories about why certain behaviours develop, to try and coax the child into a more normal behaviour. So, you know, we might be very, very slowly stepping our way from, I don't know, chips to crunchy noodles to, you know, noodles to spaghetti or something like that. You know, we're trying to trick them, basically. And in a sense, that's just observing behaviour and providing exercises or things that can be done over the following week. OT is probably a bit similar. They do some exercises, make some observations, give you some exercises you can do at home. You go back the next week. The thing that was different about this was, I mean, Danielle has a very nice structure. I write down what we've been doing, so what exercises we've done, and whether or not the child has agreed to do them, and whether where we got to, whether I've noticed any differences in behaviour. Importantly and interestingly, whether anyone else, third party, has noticed any changes in behaviour. And then when you're in the session, Danielle is doing an assessment of your child, and she'll say, so I'm noticing, because she notices things that I wouldn't notice. So she's saying, I'm noticing that she's, you know, doing this with her eye tracking, or she's doing that with her balance, or whatever. So you write those things down, and then she'll demonstrate and give you exercises to write down in your own words, so that you go away and they're the things that you're going to do that will target the things that she observed during the session, which is important because it's a very useful thing to go back to as a really tired and stressed parent. It is still the case that I will take and practice 1 or 2 of the exercises she's given me, probably rather than the 4 or 5, because they're the ones that have stuck in my head more. It's useful to be able to go back and see them. But it's also useful to be able to see the change in the period of time, because if you didn't go back and have a look, you would almost not believe the extent of the change. So it's quite targeted. But I guess that the exercises that Danielle gives you to do are different to what you might expect. So they're not targeted at the behaviour, if that makes any sense. So the thing that is really different for me is that anyone else I've ever been to, paediatrician, gastro, that they are giving you a remedy to target the behaviour. Danielle is giving you something to target the cause of the behaviour, because she's looking at what the brain is doing or not doing, what the limbic system is doing or not doing, and by correcting the thing that seems to be sitting underneath the behaviour, you get the change in behaviour without trying to change the behaviour. It just sort of happens. Because the thing that she once, and I don't know whether she'll remember this, explained it to me like this: if you've got a broken leg and you keep asking a child to jump, their capacity to jump isn't going to improve until you fix the broken leg, no matter how much you practice the jumping. And it's like that, really. It's kind of going about working out how to fix the broken leg rather than practicing the jumping, I think. That's probably the way I would best describe it. So it's not just that we got bang for our buck from seeing Danielle from a parent's perspective. We are getting so much better value for our OT and for our speech therapy, because stuff is working that wasn't working before, and you can see these massive changes that weren't occurring before. You were doing the same thing over and over and just not getting these big leaps, and now we're getting these big leaps. to give you a sense, with just Elizabeth, we had been seeing privately a paediatrician, paediatric gastro, a biomedical doctor, a speech therapist for feeding, a speech therapist for speech, an occupational therapist, and I might go there for a minute. So 6, right? We don't need the speech therapist for speech anymore. We do need the speech therapist for feeding, but we're getting much better value. So we were getting nowhere, to the point where the speech therapist for feeding had said to me, I don't know that there's any point in continuing because we're not getting anywhere. Nothing that we do is making any difference. We might get one step forward, but we're getting 2 steps back, and this has been going on for a year and a half. I don't know that I can help you any more than this. But now she's able to help. So what was dead money there is now effective money. Occupational therapy, I would say we're probably getting 3 and 4 times the value we were getting before we started seeing Danielle, because the leaps are that big between sessions, and we are doing weekly sessions, but you can see big improvements week to week that we weren't getting before. We no longer need the paediatrician, except I want to go back to him because I want him to see what she is like now, because she is so different. And I'm almost certain that the gastro will discharge us the next time we go because she's off her medication. So 6 months between visits. The last time we saw him, he wanted to put up her medication and he wanted to scope her if there wasn't any improvement within 3 weeks. We did the reverse. We tried what he wanted us to do. It didn't work because she was actually better regulating herself. So when you put more medication in the picture, it was just a nightmare. Anyway, we started ratcheting down. We're now at the point where we don't, because we're not on medication anymore, he will discharge us at the next visit. I have no doubt. And what else? So our therapy costs are down by at least half, if not a third. All of our specialists are now pretty much out of the picture. I don't know exactly how that works out in terms of dollars, but it's a lot less. Certainly a lot less in terms of the amount of time I'm spending in various medical professionals' offices trying to work out what the hell. Oh, there was also, a developmental ped that was involved at one point, but she saw us between when we booked the appointment and when we saw her. We'd seen Danielle 3 times, and she said, this child bears no resemblance to the one that is referred to in the referrals. Whatever it is that you're doing, keep doing it, and I'd be surprised if you need to come back and see me. So we were on a trajectory where we would have needed her to do all the autism assessments and all of that. That's where we were headed, and we haven't needed it. Yeah. So we went to see my paediatrician not too long after we'd done the hearing assessment and the speech therapy initial assessment. And I think we'd had 1 or 2 visits with Danielle at that point. And he was already saying, gee, she doesn't seem to me to be as bad as the assessment says. And I was saying, well, she's definitely improved. And then we went back, I think 3 months later, because he was concerned and he did want us to go and see a developmental paediatrician who we weren't able to get into. We ended up going back to see him also because she'd had the extra bowel episode, and so he wanted to review her after that. But she was so noticeably different between when he had seen her 2 to 3 months earlier and the 3-month later visit that he was quizzing me extensively about what Danielle had been doing with us, because it was just extraordinary to see a kid go from where she was to where she had ended up, and then ended up, I think, speaking with Danielle about what she does and whether or not she could get involved in helping some other patients, because I was explaining to him, not only what had occurred with my child, but what had occurred with some of my friends' kids who were also patients of his, the changes changes in them, and then some other patients who were patients of Danielle's but not patients of his, and the extraordinary change in some of them, particularly, you know, some of the autistic kids. And he was obviously interested because he's one of those rare, lovely paediatricians who is not at all governed by ego. He's governed by outcome, and yet it was just as clear as day the incredible outcomes that we got from doing this work with her. And it just strikes me that there are so many kids who could benefit from this, and for a very, very small investment you can see whether or not you're going to get an outcome, I think. And to me, it's the gains are things that would prevent lifelong interventions. So a child who was really struggling to learn to speak was going to be a child who was going to require, I think, assistance probably through most of infants and or primary school, and would would really struggle to reach their potential, and who has got to a point where they have completely neurologically caught up to their peers, will never need that intervention, will never need the amount of government assistance that I think she otherwise really would have required. Hard to prove because you can't say for sure, but we were on a trajectory that I think was going to be very different had we not found this kind of treatment and Danielle's approach. So